Sunshine. Is that satisfying?
Immediately people thought, God, blimey, that's going to be good. And it was very good.
I thought Cream was the greatest name for a band. It was just so perfect. I really did have no idea where it could go, though. I just loved being involved and working with them. It was a step. I wasn't even thinking about, certainly wasn't thinking about money. It's a shame, really, that it finished when it did. It's a shame for my bank balance. But
today, some people say, oh, I don't remember that group from the 60s, I don't remember them. I mean, people can't remember every band from the past, but if you just sort of hum a few bars of Sunshine of Your Love, they say, oh, yes, I remember that tune, I remember that riff. And then, of course, they know who you're talking about.
Right up there with, sort of Purple Haze, and later on, Whole Lotta Love, All Right Now. It's one of the greats of all time.
Well, I guess that the hallmarks of Cream's material during the period when Pete Brown was writing most of the material was the fact that he introduced some very clever original lyrics which tackled topics that you wouldn't normally associate with a rock band.
Cream as an entity were not an atypical band. They'd been in atypical outfits and done session stuff and that, but this was much more of a, based in blues rock, but was going to go sort of like a total fusion on stage.
He took the pressure off them when it came to delivering songs. Songs were done because he could help with the lyrics, and it was easier. And because they were such great musicians, all three of them, it let them room to just concentrate on the music.
He'd started out as a beat poet back in the early 60s, and this was something that Pete Brown did. He would actually go around sort of taking part in sessions with jazz bands, jazz musicians, reciting poetry to music.
His lyrics are very visual, and they have a very visual content, and they paint a picture, in a way also quite obscure, so that psychedelic sort of psychedelia meets rock meets madness is quite a good thing, because they're quite obscure and quite poetic, but they're very pictorial as well, and I think it went very well with what was going on at the time. I mean, we were in the middle of the psychedelic thing. It was the 60s, total madness, everyone going bonkers, taking everything, doing everything.
He was some kind of this whack job, brainy intellect guy that's very colorful, obviously well-read, full of images. I don't know if it was from LSD or he just was naturally born a little bit different than the rest of us, but he had this great imagery.
Yeah, I've always had this theory about especially about things like acid, which I've never knowingly taken, which is that acid made some people with no imagination feel that they had an imagination, which was perhaps for some people that was nice. But what they did, unfortunately, what acid did was that people that had an imagination and that took the stuff quite often got pushed over the top.
You've got to be careful with him because he writes things and they come true, so you have to be nice, so he writes nice things, because sometimes he writes kind of a bit heavy type things and they come true,
The important thing really is the collaboration between Pete and Jack Bruce. They formed a great songwriting team. And this was a time when Eric Clapton hadn't really developed as a songwriter himself.
In some respects, Clapton, I think, felt on the outside. Clapton ultimately would become more of a songwriter, but it was always Pete and Jack as sort of this collaborating kind of twosome that ultimately would make Eric feel left out, and ultimately, I don't know if that's what led to it, but ultimately Eric breaking the band up at the height of its popularity.
We'd like to stop playing this rubbish and dedicate a song to the Cream, regardless of what kind of group they might be in. We'd like to dedicate it to Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, and Jack Bruce.
Cream were a milestone in bands, that they were probably the first supergroup. I mean, everyone compares Cream and Jimi Hendrix, but Jimi Hendrix wasn't a supergroup. Jimi Hendrix was a brand new group with new musicians formed, and he was just special and iconic and godlike and brilliant, but they weren't a supergroup.
We're being put up the air.
I remember when I was writing for Melody Maker, suggesting once, wouldn't it be great if you had the kind of dream band? I think we called it the Beat Group, something like that. The Beat Stars Beat Group, where people voted for their favourite musicians. And among the winners were Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker and Eric Clapton in each of their categories. So the seeds were kind of sown in that sort of thinking in the 60s.
Certainly at a time where songs had much more structure, begin, verse, chorus, middle eight, to end. Here was a band that never straightened anything out. Really made it quite exciting from a playing point of view. You get the feeling that there's a band. It's only a trio, but there's three guys playing round about the same song, but their own versions of the same song.
You could look at them and you think, that's interesting. It's much more interesting than a lot of people look like, I think the Beatles were the same, of course, but they had the benefit of all that tremendous sort of publicity machine where Cream did it themselves.
The early 60s we talked about beat groups and pop groups, but we didn't really talk about rock groups. The Beatles weren't a rock group as such. Their music, their instruments were used to back the lyrics in the songs. Whereas with Cream, the whole idea was to integrate their technical skill.
There's no substitute for people really being able to play and also having a sense of musical history and being able to look at to find various good influences and incorporate them into what they were doing.
And also, they were presented as a popular band, not a pop band, but they were popular. So for the first time, bands like Cream appeared on Top of the Pops. Bloody hell, what's all that about? And it was like, we had this sort of jazz rock fusion band on Top of the Pops, wrapping paper. Bloody hell, what's all that about? And that's what made them special. It was the first time a band like that became major popular.
In the city, feeling pretty, down and out and making love to you on the shore. Shattered windows, stairs to nowhere. In your picture as I gaze ahead and don't see that they're calling, wondering sadly.
Eric, you have a large and growing fan following here in Britain, and I think that they expect a certain kind of music from you, a kind that they didn't get on your hit record Wrapping Paper. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree, because we did want to surprise them in a way, because we didn't want them to sort of just, accept us as just a blues band. We wanted to be something more than that,
Yeah, well, you certainly did.
They had a couple singles out really before the first record came out. They did it. Their first single was a song called Wrapping Paper, which I believe was suggested to them by Robert Stigwood, who was managing them. Stigwood was a pretty important guy in the scene. He had been working with some bands, and I think he wanted to give the band some kind of really commercial kind of song to start with. And it really sounds like this Bing Crosby ballad that Jack Bruce croons. There's no guitar. If you didn't know it was Cream, you wouldn't know.
Whether the idea was to produce something radio friendly instilled by their manager. Maybe it was his idea to do that, I don't know, but certainly it didn't do them justice.
Although it sounded like them, it wasn't the Cream that you'd expect to release a single like that.
Wish I knew what you'd done to me, turn me on, things I never knew.
The reason it was put out was obvious, is because it was the nearest thing they got to an obvious single. It was probably one of the came from the first recordings, and like everyone in those days, they wanted to put out a single first to test the water.
I remember when the single came out, I was at Melody Maker with my colleague Nick Jones, who was also a great fan of Clapton and Cream, and rushing in to play this single, and sort of looking at each other and thinking, well, what's this? You know, it's rather a weak song.
I was very preoccupied with movie images, especially the idea of ghosts and the things of ghosts in movies, you know, always fascinated me when they were on the more poetic side, you know. And so the idea of, this weird idea of two people that can only meet in a picture on the wall of an old house, which has got all sorts of weird Hollywood, old romantic Hollywood connections and strange kind of ghosty movies, you know. Just came and it seemed to work.
Definitely a track I would suggest people actually go and listen to. And I think they'd be mildly surprised, if not greatly surprised, at the richness in the track.
I don't think it fits on an album, that's why it didn't go on an album. It makes sense for me, you know. Great record, but whether it's a classic really is down to people's opinion. Well, I bought the first album, Fresh Cream, as soon as it came out, because I went to see the Cream at the Ricky Tick in Hounslow, just after they'd done some European stuff they wouldn't even heard of here, and there was 150 people, and they hold about 400 or 500. So I went out and bought the album. Well, it was a blinding record. And then I went back 1 month later, and they were queuing around the block, and it was just like, bang.
Anticipation was very high. Everybody was eagerly looking forward to hearing this band because they'd already had their own fan base. Ginger, Eric and Jack were already kind of revered by blues fans, certainly.
They were aware of studio techniques and they knew what they were doing musically with themselves, and it was just about coming together and seeing how it worked on the album. So, you know, from day one, it's interesting.
It was recorded as a lot of albums were at that time, where, you know, they basically set everything up in a room, they mic everything up, and they let all the sound bleed from one mic to another, and they just record it live. And through doing that, you know, that's how albums like that actually sound like the band do. Whereas a lot of other bands where they, you know, especially now, it's kind of a forgotten about thing, and, you know, they lay down the drums first or whatever, and then they'll build it all up, but then you're taking it away from what a band actually sounds like while they interact, kind of thing, which is the most important thing. And so in doing that, in recording it like that, you do it very quickly. You can record an album in, you know, a couple of weeks if need be, and it sounds like the band. It sounds live. There may be mistakes in there, but I think for Cream, that's what gave it that edge.
All the structuring on the music had gone. You know, you listen to the Beatles and the Stones, and everything was structured. There were choruses and there were verses, and this was all gone. This was all gone out the window. And even the structure on even the songs that were very structured still had a feel that it was just hung together by a thread, and it might go around that corner or this corner.
Although it wasn't hugely successful in terms of production and original songwriting, it was good insight into what to expect from this potentially all-powerful group.
And it was very fresh, very fresh. It was Fresh Cream because I'd never heard anything like it. You know, suddenly around the corner came Hendrix, you know, after that, and you start to accept albums like that. You start to accept albums that were jam-based and that weren't totally heavily constructed. You start to accept it. There were only 2 or 3 structured songs, the rest were very loose. And so I think that you started to accept after that, but this was the first one that really did it.
Their manager insisted on producing it. In fact, there was even a time when Ginger they were doing sessions for that, and Ginger deliberately sabotaged it by knocking a bottle of Coke into the recording console, which must have done probably a few grand's worth of damage. I don't know if he did it deliberately, but I've got a feeling it might have been on his mind, you know.
So as a first record, it wasn't brilliant in the sense of the first Beck record, Truth, the first Zeppelin record, the first Traffic record, Dear Mr. Fantasy. Live is where this band was really creating a name for itself.
Well, I Feel Free is a strange thing. It was our only real attempt at a pop song. And you've got the alliteration in the title, so I mean, you know, it's kind of, it's an instant sort of, you remember that title.
I Feel Free is one, it's just a brilliant song. It's got that melancholy sort of crying thing, when someone's crying for help or when people are searching for something. I always felt those songs had that pleading feel, and they did that stuff so well. You know, they weren't just, you know, they weren't just saying it, they were just crying it out.
An amazing example of Eric's kind of that lyrical flowing phrasing he had, it's called the woman tone.
The woman tone is produced by using either the bass pickup or the lead pickup, but with all the bass off. And in fact, if you use both pickups, you should take all the bass off on the tone control. That is to turn it down to 1 or O, you know, on the tone control, and then turn the volume full up, you know, and it's supposed to sound like this.
The funny thing about I Feel Free is it's not really a guitar-based song, and at the beginning it's very, well, the whole song is vocal-led with the whole harmony, two-part harmony thing running all the way through it. The vocal that starts is sort of singing this line. And then the other vocal comes in sort of on top of that, which is going. So it's just a build-up of vocals, and then the main song comes in. If you listen to that guitar, you know, if you listen to that song, the guitar is actually quite low in the mix throughout the whole song, which is an interesting thing. So it's showing, you know, they don't need to use guitars all the time. They're more than capable of doing other stuff too.
At the time, their manager was, who won't be mentioned, was insisting on producing their records, and he couldn't produce a pea out of a paper bag. So Jack, whether knowingly or not, actually wrote an arrangement that was more or less producer-proof. You can't actually cut it about. You can't play with it. You can't fuck around with it. It's actually, the whole thing is like built-in, solid. And it's amazing. It's an amazing arrangement.
Yeah, it was just another example of Cream producing something that was more than just another blues jam, I think.
It's a much bigger song. It feels much more orchestrated than a lot of their other songs, Cream's other songs, and as such, it just has a total 60s vibe, you know.
The only thing it relates to is certain things maybe that Brian Wilson tried to do, where he had a very legato, very soft top line, vocal line, against a tremendously driving, stomping beat, you know, a tremendous backing track, with backing vocals to cushion the thing, you know, and harmonies. So that's why I like it still. I don't care for the words much. You know, our one pop song.
I can drive down the road my eyes don't see, though my mind wants to cry out loud, though my mind wants to cry out loud. Dance floor is like the sea, ceiling is the sky, you're the sun, and as you shine on me, I feel free.
But you know, then you notice this fantastic jump from that to Disraeli Gears, which is produced by a fantastic producer with a wonderful engineer. A lethal combination of those two guys. You listen to the difference between those two records, it's just like chalk and cheese, you know, incredible.
When you listen to Disraeli Gears, you think they were really enjoying that. It sounded like it was an easy record to make. The material seemed to come easy. The playing was good, and I think it was their complete work.
This band that started up playing in small pubs and clubs and bars was turning into, really was becoming a supergroup. It really, that helped break them in America, and they became very, very successful.
It just opened their market massively, and you know, people just were clamouring to see the band live and eating up the units. So, and you know, that was the strength. That was the strength of Disraeli Gears.
They went in there after doing Fresh Cream. They knew where they were going. They went in there and they just did it, and it all seemed to come. You feel it all came out quickly, and it wasn't a big problem, and they did the job. And I think, to me, that's why it works.
Tom Dowd was planned to produce the album, and then they met Felix Pappalardi, a bass player himself, who of course had much more affinity with the group, understood what they were doing.
Felix really knew what to do with Cream in the studio. He gave them their recorded sound, really, with Tommy Dowd, and they were up and away.
Felix Pappalardi, he's the one who took the music track to Strange Brew, which Cream had originally written as Hey Lottie Mama. Felix said, can I take this home and work on a melody and a vocal? Coming back the next day with Strange Brew, which is one of the great, great songs.
It's almost got an essence of funk to it, I guess, and it's working its way just around 3 chords, but it's the feel in between that plays in between whatever chord it is. And so the chords are just, you know, A major 7 and all these 7th chords, but it's doing which makes it a bit special, and it makes it that little bit harder to play and gives it that edge.
Where the first record was just mainly cover records, you would think that here, you know, if they were growing as writers, this should have been the first record. Very disappointing record. Sunshine of Your Love went on to become a great song. Other than that, Disraeli Gears was a really bad kind of sophomore record.
Disraeli Gears was their finest moment. I think that they were really on it. Everything worked about it. It would just seem, you listen to pick up Sgt. Pepper or Evolve, or you pick up Let It Bleed by the Stones, or you pick up, I don't know, Are You Experienced by Hendrix. You just think those all work, and this was another one that all worked.
Sunshine of Your Love had just come out, and every single band did Sunshine of Your Love. Not one band could get it right.
If you want to say, what's Cream sound like? Listen to Sunshine of Your Love. That is so much Cream. It's just such a style, and again, it's originality. It's like they couldn't be anyone else.
Well, it's a powerful introduction. It's the sort of thing that a bass player would come up with, I guess. Very powerful, bassy, beefy sort of intro, which turned into a song, and a very kind of, it's a great hook phrase, a hook line, I should say.
The hook wasn't mine. Eric wrote it. I think Jack wrote some of it and Eric wrote some of it. And it wasn't what I would have written. But then it was the hook that actually got the song going. Well, plus the main riff as well that Jack wrote. So for a long time I didn't feel, I didn't feel that comfortable with it.
When I first started touring after Cream, I refused to do any of the songs that we'd done with Cream. And then after a while, I went to see a Bob Dylan concert, and he sort of did the whole set of depression songs or something, you know. And I felt really pissed off that he didn't do sort of All Along the Watchtower or something that I knew, you know.
I've been waiting so long to be where I'm going, in the sunshine of your love. All right.
Cream was by no means a jazz band. They were an electric rock blues jam band. But we listen to songs like Sunshine of Your Love, and we hear how Baker finesses and plays with the timing, putting the backbeat on 1 and 3 that no drummer had ever done, and the way that riff works so perfectly.
It just has all those qualities, a really great riff, a really catchy verse, and a really great hook. You know, I mean, it's everything you could want to have in a song.
And lyrically, the idea of Sunshine of Your Love, I know that Pete Brown and Jack were up one morning, and the sun was coming into the window, and it's getting near dawn, and that image by itself was great, and the sort of image and the textures and sort of illusion created by Sunshine of Your Love, it was perfect.
It survived, I suppose, because it's it's rather like Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water. It's a sort of theme that guitar players pick up and play instantly. In fact, in some shops they used to put up signs saying, "Do not play Stairway to Heaven, Sunshine of Your Love," or Smoke on the Water, the three most distinctive heavy rock riffs of all time. And then Cream is up there with them, I think.
It's just become a classic riff because it's written kind of around the blues riff. You know, you've got these notes, but it's that one that sort of bridges the two notes there. Instead of going, it just wouldn't sound right. So he's put this, you know, typically blues note in between.
Jack Bruce as a bass player is brilliant. As a vocalist, found outstanding.
He is a great singer, Jack. He's one of the great voices.
He had this very unique vibrato in his voice. Nobody else had that. And again, this was this perfect kind of counterpart. I mean, his voice almost had a female quality to it. So when you juxtapose that against this great kind of grinding thing that Cream created, it was a perfect counterpart.
It's one of those elements that you get a band that's almost so unique in a way, and that grows so quickly in such a short space of time, and then is gone. It's almost like it was too quick to take everything in, and I think it's like juggling it as quickly as you can, then it's gone, and you're left with one of the balls left, and Clapton was the ball that was left, and everybody went, oh, right, yeah, that's the reference point for everything Cream, this great guitarist that came through.
When people think Cream, they think Clapton, because I think he's the one that's gone on to do so much after Cream. And they forget, you know, how much of a big part Jack Bruce played in the whole band, you know, with his bass lines, his driving bass, and with the vocals and the lyrics that he wrote as well, you know, he did so much for the band.
Some people actually thought that Eric should have been the lead singer with Cream. Certainly in America, they tended to think that. They thought of Eric as the front man, which has always rankled a bit with Jack, understandably.
I always thought that there was always a little bit, you know, they're never quite sure who was the lead vocalist. It was either Eric or it was Jack, and sometimes you get a feeling of a little bit of friction, but not in a horrible way, just in like a musical way. They all just sort of fight in their corner a bit. But to me, that sort of made it work.
What was right about it was the chemistry of what we were working on. You know, it actually worked. A lot of it worked really well. We sort of understood what was happening, you know, what needed to be done, and a lot of it worked.
Jack would go on to do a solo career, and you really hear sort of his more classic jazz elements coming out. You hear Jack's theme for an imaginary Western, made famous by Mountain.
A painted wagon on the morning, dusty roads where they have gone. Sometimes traveling through the darkness, they met the summer coming home.
His voice is actually, I suppose it's an acquired taste for some people. I've heard some people say they actually don't like his vocal style, but then it's very distinctive, very powerful, and he's one of the better blues singers, I think. But also he was able to articulate Pete Brown's lyrics, so and that was quite a coup, quite a feat, because they're quite difficult, some of them.
The first thing that really gathered me up was Bach, I suppose. You know, I got really involved in that because he, believe it or not, he is really the ultimate in bass players. You know, he really was the governor of all time. You know, his bass lines are just incredible, and I think any bass player can learn just about everything in conventional harmony that there is to know from that.
He was a great bass player. You know, people tend to forget that as well. If you listen to his playing, you know, I mean, he had a real driving bass sound, almost to the point of distortion, and you know, his movement was against it. You know, he didn't have anything particularly straight to play against, so he was never just a straight player, because you had Ginger Baker's movement constantly, and Clapton's versatility on the guitar as well.
The Who were three-piece with a singer, with Daltrey. Zeppelin were a three-piece with Plant as a vocalist. The Stones were, you know, two guitars, bass, drums, with Mick Jagger as a singer. I mean, you think of trios, I mean, the only other one really that comes to mind is Hendrix, who was a guitar player, but you think of singing bass players like that, other than McCartney, and again it's a quartet, none of it comes to mind.
Well, after Disraeli Gears, which was song-orientated in many ways and produced some great hits, there was still a feeling that somehow we needed to get across the live excitement, the fact that the band could be so thrilling in the live context.
They've been going for a while. They'd released a couple of albums before, and now they wanted to try something different. They were touring a lot in the States, and you know, so they spent a lot of time recording the album.
Wheels of Fire is an amazing double record of a half live, half studio, which was maybe one of the first times you'd ever heard a record do that.
I'm sure they did the studio side and then thought, well, you know, we do explore, we are quite improvisational live, so let's put something out. So it's probably a safe bet to sort of, you know, do the live stuff on the back of a studio, and so that that doesn't get attacked for being self-abasing or whatever, and so you've got that solidity of going, well, we're still playing to form here.
Making records that took a long time to make, I don't think they were into it. So I think for that reason it's a good record to make, but they didn't really make a double album.
The recording techniques were becoming more and more interesting, and the things that you could do. Whereas before, everything they'd recorded was probably on 4 tracks, now they had like 8 tracks or perhaps even more.
There were the two aspects again of this kind of schizophrenic band, the kind of chart pop material, albeit very clever chart pop material, and the stretched out long arrangements, which gave them all a chance to show off what they could do individually. So Wheels of Fire was a compromise.
People slammed the live stuff, they just thought it was self-flagellating, as far as the musicianship went and stuff. They were just like having a go for themselves and recording themselves, masturbating live,
On Wheels of Fire, they became songwriters. We see what great performers they were live. They were working with orchestral instruments in the studio. I think Jack was playing cello. Eric's playing had taken on such kind of the mythic proportions. When we think of Eric Clapton, we think of him, Wheels of Fire, Crossroads. Wheels of Fire was it. You think back to Zeppelin and In Through the Outdoor and Coda, which were horrible records. Now you think of a band going out on a high note like Wheels of Fire, and you think, my God, if they could have kept it together, they would have, who knows what they may have done.
Hard to say whether it worked, because the whole of one side was a song called The Toad, which was really a drum solo album, a song by for Ginger. So really, if you take The Toad away, then you've got 1.5 albums, and do you think it's a great 1.5 album? Who knows, it's questionable.
I mean, a lot of people who don't like drumming particularly or aren't interested always found Ginger's solos exciting because of the way he looked. They could see that he was somebody fighting the drum kit in a way, trying to conquer it.
I get the feeling that Ginger Baker, when he steps on stage, he doesn't know what he's going to be doing, even in the songs he's rehearsed. But he just knows the beginning, the front, the end, the changes, and that's it. And everything else is up for grabs.
Live, he would take a studio part and even expand on it more, and you listen to some of what he's doing. You try to count what he's doing, and usually you won't count right, and you'll come in a different place and he comes in, which was the grandeur and the majesty of his playing.
He was a guy who was a conscientious musician, he explored interesting things and he could really play. He had a great style, great feel.
Over here we had people like Carmine Appice from Vanilla Fudge, really who sort of glorified the double kit. But Baker had been doing it for a while, and his playing, unlike Bonham, he wasn't a thrasher.
Kind of like how Keith Moon played, but a bit more civilized. He wasn't so crazy about it. Whereas with Hendrix, he was always trying to keep the rhythm section up with him. I think in Cream it was the other way round, where Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce were really pushing Clapton to play harder and faster and stuff.
I always feel that Jack was half blues and half jazz. Ginger was jazz, and Eric was blues. So you got that complete mixture. So you got one in the middle, was a bit half of each, and Ginger and Eric at the two other ends, and it sort of worked really well because it gave it such a different feel.
Eric came from a really strict blues background. I mean, he was used to jamming over, 1, 4, 5 chords, a G, a C, and a D. So when they would go into these jams, in the beginning, he was a little lost.
Jack and Ginger really did kick Eric up the arse in terms of... Eric was a good improviser in a limited area, but very, very strong, very good. And then when they got hold of him, of course, they pushed him into stuff that he would never have thought of doing. But he did get there with it.
I don't practice at all.
Not at all?
I used to, but I don't anymore.
In the distant days when you used to practice, what kinds of things did you do?
I just used to... well, first of all, I learned all the rudiments and things. I don't know whether I can play them all now. But then I just used to play solos. Just to sit on the drum kit and play it all day.
He's got a great sense of timing and rhythm. And the fact that he's pretty unorthodox and not as disciplined as you'd think he would be makes it even better.
What was novel and interesting about him was this kind of jazz sensibility, feeling for improvisation, together with this raw passion for playing, which was all part of his personality.
I'm a great believer in a good drummer using his drums as an instrument. Not just playing, well, it's 3 chords, so I'll play those 3 chords and that's what you want. It's like, well, yeah, that's the song, but, can you give me anything more there? Is there anything you've got to add to it?
Bad drummers play through a song, they ignore the verse, they ignore the chorus, just steamroller through it, and they're, heads down for it, last one at the end buys the beers. But, Ginger's completely the opposite to that. He lets things move and groove, and because of his jazz training, jazz is built around a lot of changes, a lot of things, and a lot of fields, and I think because of that, and he comes from that jazz field, that he was very good for the band because he gave them a completely different tilt.
I was doing it before I got involved with Cream. I was doing it without the riff. Jack put the riff to it. I had the lyric already, or the makings of the lyric. And I was doing it with my own setup, with my own jazz and poetry thing,
It's kind of got a grumbling sort of tone about it. Whether it actually says anything intelligent about politicians or not, I wouldn't like to say, but it certainly has a kind of angry youth against us against them sort of vibe about it.
It did start from this image of your rather kind of besuited, straight-looking politician cruising around in his limo and with his tongue hanging out over the beginnings of people with miniskirts, young girls with miniskirts, and trying to entice them into his car and do whatever he feels that he wants to do, And of course it's also to do with corruption. It's a corruption image, really. It's using your nasty power and influence and money to try and buy something, something sexual, which is what our politicians are famed for.
I think Politician kind of sums up Cream's ability to write interesting and thoughtful pieces, not just rely on blues jamming. So Cream had those two aspects which made them much more than just your average R&B revival group, which they could have been.
You said no ways could secure you at the station. Platform tickets, restless diesel, goodbye window. I walked into such a sad time at the station. And I walked out, felt lonely.
White Room started life as an 8-page poem, and then bearing in mind that Cream was on the road all the time, so there was very, very little time for me to do any work with them. So when I got together with Jack, we threw everything. We looked at everything that was possible.
It was actually written about the White Room that he lived in. He was going through a kind of crisis himself at the time. Pete was living in this room, which he painted all white, so I guess he was writing about that.
I had not really lived anywhere for a while, and I had just been dossing on people's floors and things, and then I started to earn some money, and I got the White Room, which was a room in someone's flat. And it means, the White Room sort of means starting again with a blank page.
Claustrophobia as well, fear of the outside world. I think that was something to do with the mixture of drugs that he was taking at the time.
Well, it was actually after I went slightly off my head, although I was still kind of pretty strange, because it was the time when I had just stopped taking drugs and alcohol. I knocked it all on the head in one go, mainly through fear, because I was getting really stupid with it. Not, you know, I mean, compared to some people, it wasn't that much, but it was actually fucking me up, basically, and I was getting stupid with it.
So in a song like White Room, we hear this great sort of image that played off each other in a white room with black curtains. That's all we need to hear. We hear that great crunching guitars and the bass and the vocal, and we're taken somewhere.
Yeah, when everybody plays White Room, they play like these chords at the beginning. And so on, and it does do that, and that's how it sounds. But apparently Clapton, what he did was he took all the strings off of his guitar apart from one, and then found one of the notes from each chord and bent that string as far as it would bend to that pitch, and then he recorded each different note doing it that way on different strings 6 times. So you had one for each string. So when you played it back, it sounded like this big chord, which is why when you listen to the beginning of White Room, it has that really haunting sound kind of thing, which is quite amazing and experimental and quite ahead of its time, I think, which shows again just how underrated Clapton is sometimes.
It is definitely right to say that Clapton is an unbelievably great guitarist.
Well, yes and no. I would argue about some of the things that he got kind of guided into by various managements and things. I would say that they're not as creative as some of the other things he did. But he keeps coming up with good stuff at times. Then he has times when he does horrible kind of pop type things with terrible drum machines, and which I think he should really not do.
He's gone into country, he's gone into straight pop. In fact, he's gone to areas that he said he would never venture into. When Cream started to get a little bit successful, because in '68 they were huge, they were headlining North America, they could have gone on for years. Eric wanted no part of it. He put together Blind Faith. He quit Blind Faith after a year because he felt it was getting too commercial, which is why I find it a little bit difficult to deal with the idea that after Blind Faith he formed Eric and the Dominoes, which was, it had its moments, but it was a little light. I mean, that was a very commercial record. I mean, Layla is really just a pop song. And then his solo records, I mean, my God, After Midnight is pitiful.
He's always given up things to travel the road that he feels right for him. And that's a tough thing to do. I know he's been very fortunate that the public absolutely adore him and they follow him, but he's still always done it whether they would or not. He wouldn't know when he left the Yardbirds he would still be successful. Who knows, he might have disappeared into obscurity, but he took that step because he believed it was the right thing for him musically and what he wanted to do. And there are very few people who have that courage.
Eric was the first to really make his mark as where the guitar player was like the focal point of the band. I mean, before we'd had Hank Marvin with the Shadows, who was a very good guitar player.
Whereas there was a lot of great guitarists around at the time. But Clapton was just going back to the straight blues thing. He was so heavily inspired, but he was actually a white guy who could play blues properly and do it properly, which wasn't really heard of at the time.
At the time that I started playing, most guitar players were trying to be follow the other white players, you know, and I was much more, you know, very racial about it. I wanted to be like a black guitar player, and that to me, it's a bit of a, you know, strange sort of situation. I've never figured that out.
He is the first superstar guitarist, bar none. You know, we have Jeff Beck's after that, you have your Jimmy Page's, you know, you have all those people after that, you know, and in America then you get your Van Halens, etc. But Eric was the first one that people focused on.
He's changed, as all good bluesmen do, you know, like a lovely mature old whiskey, you know, or bourbon. They just get richer with age.
So does he deserve the legacy as a guitar player? I don't think so. I think he deserves it as someone who has survived the music wars, to have a career that spans, I mean, 4 decades in terms of creating anything worthwhile after 1969. I mean, there may be brief moments, but I don't think so.
You know, looking back now again, you could be critical. You know, you could criticise stuff that Hendrix did, but could you say he wasn't a legend? I mean, nah, people weren't doing that, and they weren't doing it like that, and you know, it's about time and place.
He's always just pumped out complete quality music, and his playing has never suffered, even to this day. He's still a hero to many guitarists.
Well, Cream came to a rather abrupt end, which I was very sorry about. I thought it was a great shame that they broke up when they did, because they had so much potential. And instead of which we had Goodbye Cream, which was their last album.
Goodbye was an amazing record. So here you have a record that illustrates what a great live band they were. I mean, how many bands call it quits with the live record? I don't even think I can think of anyone.
Goodbye has all those elements of what went before. You know, the improv stuff, that whole feeling of them, the jazzier, bluesier side. You know, all the roots are still there, and what they developed into the Cream sound. You know, and their individuality is again incredibly strong on the album.
I felt that if they'd stuck it out and stayed together and carried on writing, for example, Eric was beginning to develop as a writer then, working with George Harrison and producing the song Badge, which many people considered was actually one of Cream's best tunes, actually one of its better ones.
Talking about a girl that looks quite like you.
And the cool thing about that song is it doesn't start with a guitar riff or anything like that. It's just the bass on its own doing this kind of. So it's kind of like a bass riff, but a bass riff that's starting the song, which you don't find very often, kind of thing. And then the chords to Badge are very straightforward, apart from when it gets to the riff, and the riff is, I think, the catch of the song, because there's no official chorus to the song. There's no real highlight vocally, and so it has this riff which goes.
though they weren't talking to each other, there's tales of them doing heavy drugs by this team, and I mean heavy drugs, not speaking to each other, despising each other, nobody talking to anybody, Ginger bouncing drumsticks off cymbals and hitting Eric in the back of the head. These are all true tales. I mean, being so wrecked that they can barely stand on stage. Some people are just able to function on this level. Cream were able to do that. They tapped, I suppose, on this thing that alcohol and drugs gave them.
It was the right time to go. They were a great band. They showed a lot of people a lot of things. They brought a lot of pleasure to a lot of people, left great records for people to listen to, and I think the timing was right. As far as being a great album to say goodbye to, is there ever a great album to say goodbye to? Not really.
Goodbye had lots of interesting things in it, you know. I mean, it was just a thing that people do. I mean, I'm pretty fond of that, doing that scrapyard thing on it. I'm pretty fond of that.
When I was young, they gave me a Monroe piano. Spent all my time inventing the cup of tea.
It was just it was meant to be like a mock autobiography song. Just about how people become musicians and what they do.
Missing the last bed, waving a cheery herring.
We wrote it over the phone. He was in LA and I was in London. And I had to record on a very, very old, very bad old Grundig tape recorder. I had to record the song off him playing it, the backing track and then we talked about the lyrics when I got most of it. Some of those lyrics are Jack's, you know. There's some couple of really good things in that he wrote.
But on Goodbye, it all came together, which is why after that you have Live Cream Volume 1 and Volume 2 and these bootlegs and various other live performances that the record company could find. An amazing record.
Just to go around and say, oh, they were great and it was lovely and they loved each other, that's bullshit. They didn't love each other. Everything wasn't great, it was tough. But they made great records and they were a great band. So who cares?
I suppose it's all the heat of the moment. So in many ways, perhaps it was a good thing that Cream only lasted about 3 years, 66 to 68. In that time, they packed an awful lot in. It was tremendously exciting.
They created a level that no one has ever reached. I don't think anyone has ever tried to do that because they knew they couldn't.
It was becoming self-indulgent. There was a risk of Cream overdoing things, playing too long, solos that went on for 20 minutes. I mean, people groan if you say 10-minute bass guitar solo now. Who wants to hear that? Because not realising the excitement when it was Jack Bruce playing it with Cream.
A lot of criticism was railed at them for the live stuff, you know, extending a song to the point of almost boredom at some points where people lost the plot. But you know, there's a self-motivated thing in there where they're exploring themselves, and maybe they got lost somewhere in the live thing.
When they get on stage in front of an audience and when they do the job, they're brilliant. And anything great is not an easy job to do. And I think being in Cream was a tough job for any of them, but the result was fantastic.
And the fact that their career was quite short, you know, everything they did was over the space of 2 or 3 years, but the songs they did are still looked back at today as some of the best classic rock songs ever written. You know.
So there's a whole generation of people that listen to the older music and have taken it on board and say, No, I don't want to do that pop rubbish. I don't want to do rotten old punk with 2 chords and no playing. What I want to do is I want to build something that will last, which is great.
You put on a Cream record today, particularly Wheels of Fire or Goodbye or one of the live records, and tell me if any guitar player has ever reached that pinnacle again, and I'll say you're a liar.